Well, welcome back to Old Testament Survey. This is week number 2, and this is your weekly update. Of course, I'm Paul Hill, your instructor. This week, the main theme this week is the theme of covenant. Last week was creation. This week is covenant. The next week is community. The week after that is conquest, and then kingdom. And then after that, we stop using the k sounds in the titles of the weekly themes. But the theme of covenant is an essential theme for us to explore, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes and talk to you about it today. But before I do that, let me just mention a couple of quick things about the class. It looks like all of you are able to participate as you are supposed to through your quiz, through your weekly quiz, and through your discussion board. So I just encourage you to provide as much information in your discussion boards as you would like. And I want to encourage you to have an opinion. Feel free to have an opinion that you don't think is popular, as long as it's truly your take or your opinion. The idea here is discussion and learning from each other. So I encourage you to dig into that real deeply. And also, I did have one question. Some of you were wondering if we had actual class time. That is, like either via Zoom or in person. That's not how this class works. Everything is by video and through your reading and the work that you do through Moodle. But of course, if you ever have any questions about the course or about the content that we're covering, feel free to reach out to me through email, through Moodle, or by phone or text. So let's talk for a couple of moments about the idea of covenant. And with this, I want to draw your attention to something on Moodle, to a PowerPoint presentation that is right underneath the link for this video. And that PowerPoint presentation is entitled Covenant, Yahweh, and Exodus 19:6. So if you want to open that up, if you want to pause the video and open that up while we have this conversation, that would be great. So if you're going to do that, I'm going to just pause for a moment. Okay, hopefully that's enough time for you to put me on pause and open the PowerPoint. Let's talk about covenant. Now, covenant is a word that all of us have probably heard at one time or another. It's a word that shows up in science fiction and in horror movies and things like that, I think because of its religious nature. I live in a housing development, and in our housing development, we have housing covenants. That is, and the covenants are things like this. I cannot have a privacy fence. I cannot leave my trash can out on the curb for more than 24 hours and things like that. I can't paint my house blue if I wanted to paint it blue. It has to be an earth tone. So those are some covenants. Now, I think these shouldn't be called covenants because they don't really hold forth the idea of covenant from Scripture, which is a much more vibrant, richer, and more powerful kind of idea. Let me read the definition to you of covenant that is in the PowerPoint presentation. Covenant is an agreement between two parties where there are serious consequences if one does not abide by the agreed terms. In the case of the Old Testament, there are different yet related covenants. The covenant God makes with Abraham is the prototype for understanding how God works with Israel, and it's found in Genesis 15, 17, 18, and 22. So we see different versions and different expressions of the covenant expressed there in those different chapters in Genesis. Now, Yahweh, which is the name that the Old Testament uses for God, or one of the names, I should point out, that the Old Testament uses for God, Yahweh makes a covenant with Abraham, and he continues to make covenants. He makes a covenant with Noah, and later on he makes one with Moses and with David. But ultimately, Yahweh is working with Israel, and he's entering covenant with the people of Israel. And this is how Yahweh intends to relate to his people, is through these special covenants. And one thing that you're going to discover when you get into the book of Exodus, especially Exodus chapter 6, you're going to hear about how God enters into a covenant with Israel, and as a result, he reveals to them his special name, that name Yahweh. Now, elsewhere in Scripture, we see God referred to as God, G-O-D, Lord, L-O-R-D, lowercase, or we see Lord, L-O-R-D, all uppercase. And when the Bible renders Lord in all uppercase letters, that is a reference to the word Yahweh. That means that the Hebrew word Yahweh stands behind that rendering of Lord. So Yahweh, or the Lord in all caps, is the special name that God revealed to Moses and thus to all of Israel. And it is of special significance to the people of Israel. So I want you to pay close attention when you read in Exodus chapter 6 and elsewhere. But also keep in mind that Yahweh is the covenant name that God gives to his people. Now, like I said already, covenant is how God relates to his people in the Old Testament, how he relates to the people of Israel. And covenants are essentially, in the Old Testament, are from God to a weaker party, from a king to, from a sovereign to a suzerain. That is, from somebody in power to somebody who is reliant upon them. And God is going to maintain covenant with Israel. And this is one of the themes that comes up all throughout the book of Genesis and all throughout the Old Testament, is that in spite of disobedience, God is going to keep covenant with Israel. Now let me move on and draw your attention to the chapter, to Exodus chapter 19, verse 6. It's also in the PowerPoint, but you're going to be reading this on your own as well. In Exodus chapter 19, God has taken the people of Israel out of their captivity in Egypt, and they are in the desert at Mount Sinai. This is the story of Moses and the Exodus. And this is early on in the Exodus story. God takes Moses up to the mountain and he says these words to him. He says, "Now therefore, if you obey my voice and keep my covenant," and God, by the way, is speaking to Moses, and Moses is to share this with all of Israel. "If you obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession out of all the peoples. Indeed, the whole earth is mine, but you shall be for me a priestly kingdom and a holy nation. These are the words that you are to speak to the Israelites." From Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6. Now, this passage is critical for understanding what the role of Israel is in the Old Testament. They were to be a nation of priests. They were to consider themselves royalty as children of God, but also royalty with a purpose. And not just royalty with a purpose, but a priestly purpose. They were to proclaim the truth of God and be priests to the entire planet. Now, within Israel, Israel's made up of 12 tribes. There's one tribe, the Levites, and it is from the Levites that all of the priests are taken. If you're from the tribe of Judah, you can't be a priest. If you're from the tribe of Reuben, you can't be a priest. Only if you're from the tribe of Levi. And the Levites then would minister to the people throughout Israel. Now, as the Levites were to Israel, Israel is to be to the rest of the world. Now, the critical thing to consider here is that whenever Israel enters into covenant with Yahweh, that covenant brings with it a calling or a vocation. So for the Israelites to be in covenant with Yahweh means that God has given them a task to do and a role to do. And that's what you're going to be exploring this week. So I encourage you to dig in, do the reading, watch all of the videos. There's a great video on covenants from the Bible Project that'll be very illuminating to you. And I also want to draw your attention to one last resource in the Moodle shelf for this week, and it's located under the additional resources heading, and that is a PDF that is called the Divine Names in the Old Testament. There are different names used for God in the Old Testament, and that one page is a great outline to help you keep them straight. So I encourage you to go and read that. And my prayer is that this week you will learn a lot, you'll be able to keep up with your reading, and you'll be successful not only in making a good grade in the course, but in learning more and more about how the God of Israel sought to work with his people and seeks to work with them even today. May God bless you this week.